Yo, what's poppin', guys? Back like we never left BVA, and today we have a quick theory discussion on Snakeman, Gear 4th. Of course, you can tell from the thumbnail, right? So I'm sure it's a lot of speculation going on as far as like what Luffy can do in Gear 4th, Snakeman, how it compares to Boundman, and today we're going to discuss the possibilities and what do we think Luffy can do in Snakeman. Of course, we don't know much. All we can tell that Luffy went Snakeman and that his eyes are different. That's all we can tell in comparison to Boundman. His eyes are different here. So we're going to try to analyze based on what we know, what we've seen from Luffy, and try to predict the different things that we can see going forward. Of course, the name Snakeman, that's given us some hints as towards, I guess, his abilities and what he can do. It's interesting because it's kind of different from Boundman. First, for Gear 4th Boundman, we know how that works, right? In Boundman, Luffy seems to prioritize the use of like power and speed, so that's why his upper torso is so big and then his feet is so small. Not small, but they're smaller than his upper torso. That's where most of the power is generated from. Of course, the compression of his form as well is generating a lot of force. That's why he's able to fly in that form. Of course, he grows bigger as well. However, in Boundman, that was used to defeat some of the bigger animals on Riskaina, right? So Luffy developed that move to kind of counter the bigger animals. So we also saw Tankman full version, and we all assume that there is a regular Tankman form, but this was used because of the situation that he was in. Now, for the Gear 4th Snakeman, I'm not sure if that was a form that's already created or he just came up with it on the spot. My guess is that he already had it in the bag, but he just didn't know how to use it as yet. He needed to get better with observation haki before he could use Gear 4th Snakeman. What I mean is this: on Riskaina, we saw the whole flashback with Rayleigh, where Rayleigh was telling him as far as he's not as proficient with, I guess, predicting, right? He's more of a sensor. That's how he does things. So I think Luffy at this point, I think observation haki was something, I don't know if it came to him naturally as far as because that he wasn't proficient in that part. Sensing, yes, but I feel like the overall spectrum of observation haki maybe wasn't his true forte, because it was already revealed Luffy's specialty is Conqueror's Haki. More to come from that as far as from Oda in regards to how it's going to tie into his fighting, because from Conqueror's Haki, all we've seen so far is that it's a fodder mechanism, or it's a way to generate like the top tiers to talk about you, okay? It's a hype beast, knocking out fodder and being a hype beast. So hopefully we get more explanation on Conqueror's Haki. Again, I say this all the time. If we had gotten an explanation versus Dofi and now versus Katakuri would have been perfect, because both of those guys, they had Conqueror's Haki. I would have preferred it versus Dofi just because he was the first Conqueror's Haki user you run up against as far as like being a top tier in the New World. People argue whether or not Dofi's a top tier, whatever. But even versus Katakuri, I don't care, but a deeper explanation would be great, because we're getting the deeper explanation versus Katakuri for observation haki and some armament as well, because of the block mochi and shit like that. It'd have been great to get a deeper explanation for Conqueror's Haki versus Doflamingo. That would have been awesome. But regardless, while training with Rayleigh and using observation haki, I think that Luffy did not quite master this form before he left. I believe this is also obvious based on the fact that Boundman was not mastered. Boundman is completely inefficient. Doflamingo mentioned it, Law mentioned it, and Katakuri even noticed it, that Luffy, he's going to fall out of Gear 4th, and the limit is still there. So if Luffy's not mastering Boundman, I don't see how he would master Snakeman. I forgot who said this, but it was mentioned that in Snakeman, because it's probably going to be a smaller, more condensed form, he's probably not going to be using as much air and stamina, so he may be able to use that form for a bit longer. But as far as what this form is going to be predicated on, I think 100% is going to be speed. I think speed is going to be the way Snakeman moves, but I think not necessarily just regular speed. The unpredictability of how a snake moves, that's what Luffy's going to take advantage of. I did a bit of research on snakes and how snakes move, and they have I guess 4 ways in how they move, okay? I'm going to be quick with this. The first method is a serpentine method, and with this, the snake, it uses objects to kind of propel its body forward from like its neck up, right? It's like a thrusting motion. So in essence, the snake contracts its muscles and it pushes it forward, and it uses other objects to kind of propel itself to continue going forward. Of course, a snake does not have limbs. It uses the surface as a resistance. How does this tie into Luffy as far as this serpentine method? If Luffy goes into a form where he has no limbs, or he's limbless, he still has his body, but it's basically just flowing, he would have to use this unpredictable way to move, so he's going to use the surface to propel himself. And of course, this is still a manga, and a shonen manga is going to be a different way where Luffy can utilize, I don't know, maybe the tensile strength or the compression, like in Boundman, to move as well. But because he has no limbs and he's using the actual surface, it's going to be super unpredictable, and he's going to be moving at a crazy fast speed, right? As far as movement, I feel like Luffy's movement is going to be super unpredictable, because we've seen something similar before. I'm sure you guys have heard about this, Gama Gama no Bow, Baka Luffy, where Luffy turned off his brain essentially versus Enel, right? And Luffy was just flowing in the wind. Enel could not hit him when he was in this form. Yes, he could be a form of that where he's limitless, but as far as like turning off his brain, that would not be necessary if he's using the surface to move around instead of just flowing in the wind. He can still be conscious with that form. So Luffy using that form would be dope because what we saw from him is like the base form. And again, we've seen forms from like Luffy pre-time skip. He's upgraded a lot of these forms post time skip. Of course, you know, you have the Jet Gatling and shit like that, but I'm talking about like Tankman. Tankman, I think about Fusen when he used Fusen to block someone like Sengoku. Tankman is a super amplified version of that, but it's still a similar version, okay? Gomu Gomu no Bow, it would be an upgrade of that as far as like the unpredictable movement, but also being somewhat conscious to use the surface to bounce back and hit NL. Mentioning the surface and using the surface to bounce back, we can also talk about a move we saw with Boundman. Gear 4th, was it Python or Culverin, right? He used Culverin, and Culverin is crazy because Culverin was bouncing off the actual air. It was like Culverin is using Geppo. It's like a tracking. It's like a heat seeker because it follows you and doesn't come back to Luffy. It doesn't retract all the way back to Luffy. It keeps going. We've seen Luffy use something like that before. So to take a quick twist here, and this is going into Buddhism and like all that shit. Gear 4th is probably based off the Neo statue, where it's like a guardian deity, right? That's used, it's like based off like a wrestler or some shit like that. That's pretty much what Gear 4th is supposedly based off. I don't know how factual this is. Fucking wiki, alright? Based on how it is and how it looks, it pretty much, it sounds good. It sounds legit. If we take this and we apply it to Snakeman, I found something interesting that I think could be a thing based on the fight and based on where Luffy is right now. So in this case, it's called Naga. Naga is basically a deity turning into a snake, right? And the thing that's interesting here is that it represents rebirth or being reborn. You know, for snakes that they shed their skin. So Luffy being super hurt, being super, I guess, injured, him saying that's right, that could indicate, oh, I can, you know, remove some of these injuries by using this form to kind of heal myself a bit. I know that's kind of crazy. I'm not sure how that would work, but we've seen crazy shit in One Piece. So Luffy going into this Gear 4th Snakeman form could be a way to kind of rejuvenate or to regain some of his health, because we know there's still some time left. It's 12:05. I'm not sure if Luffy's using this moment to kind of hold out and use this snake form to do that, but I think it's a possibility, something we should definitely consider. Having snake skin and, you know, being reborn, that's an actual thing. Snakes, they shed their skin, right? Another thing I want to talk about is like snakes and electricity. So for snakes, they move on the ground, and apparently their scales, it kind of generates electricity. So I'm not sure if this could be an electricity form for Luffy to kind of move a bit faster, because that could be something that Oda could implement. It'd be cool if he's using electricity to move faster. Remember Niji and how Niji kind of blitzed through the air and he kind of disappeared for a bit? That'd be awesome if Luffy's using that. And remember what I said before about movement and using the surface to kind of reflect, using the electricity, being a snake and bouncing without having limbs, being limbless. There's no way you can predict how Luffy would move there. That'd be fucking unbelievable if he could do that. Why I mention electricity though is because of two things. One, the fact that snakes, they do generate electricity. That's actually a fact, and I don't want to use that alone. But also in the manga, Luffy used an actual snake attack before, other than Culverin. Luffy used Gomu Gomu no Snake Shot, and Snake Shot was interesting because when he impacted Hody Jones, that's who he was fighting, yeah? Hody Jones in Fishman Island, Hody had like an electric like shock. I'm not sure what that was about. In the anime as well, it showed like some impact. I mean, his arm looked like, you know, when Sabo is about to use dragon or a dragon type fighting style. I'm not sure if snake style could be a thing, but for the most part, it's used in the manga, and Luffy doing that is either showing great impact or is showing that Luffy is generating electricity by wiggling his arms a bit. And if that's the case, expect electricity 100% from Luffy in Snake Man form. Another cool thing I found out by doing a bit of research was that snakes, they can basically locate prey through vibrations, right? And I mentioned electricity before. So you remember in Godspeed how Killer was using like electricity to kind of program himself to kind of attack in a way? That's like the terrible way of explaining it, but something like that. So going back to what I said before, Luffy, electricity, and not having limbs, being limbless and bouncing off the surface, if Luffy could use electricity to propel himself and then also use the vibrations in the air to kind of sense where Katakuri is coming from before he does it, that's freaking OP. And that's exactly what Luffy needs, because he's closing his eyes. If he closes his eyes in this form and then just uses the vibrations in this form, because the snakes, they don't have an outer ear, they have an inner ear. So Luffy essentially, we saw he had an outer ear, but you know, if Luffy has an inner ear, he closes his eyes and he removes that sense of hearing as well, then that would greatly amplify his other abilities. That's just how senses work, right? We know Fujitora, he's blind, so his observation haki, it looks similar to Luffy's, how we saw Katakuri being depicted, like how Fujitora saw, like, sense those other people. So I think Fujitora's and Luffy's is on the same scale, on the same wavelength. If that's the case where Luffy is using vibrations, using electricity, and of course being limbless, and using the surface to move around, Snakeman is going to be a problem. I really can't wait for this. Guys, let me know what you think about all the things I said here today. Do you think these things are plausible? Are they far-fetched? I'm sure you think they are, but let me know what you think. Do you have any other theories? What do you think is going to happen? Leave them down in the comment section down below. And of course, as always, like this video if you did. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't for more videos like this. Check out my other videos. They're always lit. And of course, follow me on Twitter at BragoDAce and follow me on Twitch at BragoDAce. And I'll catch you guys later. Peace.